Okay, so I kind of, after the events over the weekend, I kind of felt compelled to make this video here, um, and just offer some of my thoughts on, for whatever they're worth, um, on things that are happening. Um, I've seen just absolute disgusting reactions to the third attempted assassination of President Donald Trump, and then the conspiracy theories that have run wild, completely unchecked, and it has gotten horribly out of control. So I've felt the need to kind of make something here to discuss this as a serious problem in our current society. And I'm kind of wondering where I should begin here. When it comes to these conspiracy theories, I had at one point sort of, I had just read, this book right here, Pat Buchanan's Churchill, Hitler, and the Unnecessary War. And in this book, Buchanan argues that World War II was an unnecessary war. It was a war that didn't need to happen. And basically, he argues that the war is the fault of the Allies. He does, on the one hand, acknowledge Hitler is not a good guy. But on the other hand, he tries to sort of downplay Hitler's own aggression, that Hitler never really wanted a war with the West. My research says that that's actually not true. He did think that war with the West eventually would have to happen, but he didn't. He had. I mean, he wasn't. From what I can tell, he wasn't like racist towards what he saw as his Anglo-Saxon brothers in the West and things like that. But the point is, right now in the United States in particular, there is a growing attraction to a revisionist history of World War II. It started with things like the post-war consensus, and it just kind of mushrooms or blossoms from there, or perhaps the parasite grows from there, however you want to look at it. And it gets to the point where now it's like, maybe Hitler wasn't such a bad guy. Maybe Hitler was onto something. And you just kind of go from there. And that is the primary problem with these conspiracy theories, is they start with this little thing here, and then people don't know how to put the brakes on it, and then they just jump from that to that. Well, if this is true, then it must be this, then this, then this, and they just start to break down so much that is really important to grasp and understand. The next thing you know, you are actually saying, Hitler wasn't such a bad guy. I think he was onto something. And then what I have seen much of has been either attempts again to downplay Hitler and his atrocities, but also to downplay his anti-Semitism, which was just, to the point where you got Holocaust deniers today, people who are trying to make Hitler seem like a reasonable guy. He wasn't anti-Semitic. He was onto something. The Jews, the Rothschilds, they were taking over the world and blah, 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 blah. I'm going to tell you, man, I was kind of falling into a lot of this stuff for a while. And that's one of the reasons why I got Pat Buchanan's book, because I was getting interested in this. So I like to think that I know how that thinking operates. But something happened. First of all, I've never really been the kind of person who just wanted to believe things because, it was contrarian It was trendy, you know, it was unique. I mean, that's definitely an attractive thing. It's kind of cool to have an opinion that most people don't really know, but that can't be the only reason you hold to an opinion or a perspective. So, what happened was I was reading. So I was looking at YouTube videos of this guy called Zoomer Historian or something like that, um, and I was really fascinated with a lot of things he was saying because he was pontificating and promoting a lot of this revisionist history stuff. And he was going to the point where he was just straight up saying, and I remember thinking to myself, man, was Hitler really that aggressive? Like, I was actually starting to think about that. I was starting to go in that direction. And then I saw a video where this one guy critiques this Zoomer historian guy. He goes through a long critique of all of his videos, where he just flat out the stuff that Zoomer historian said that Hitler never said, his hatred for the Slavs and these people, said that Hitler never said any of this stuff. He never really wanted war. Just basically that Hitler was actually a cool guy. He wanted peace and everything like that. This one guy, I forgot his name of the guy, he just straight up contradicts all of that. He goes through and he starts showing direct citations of Hitler and his high command and their hatred for the Slavs. And I'm listening to this, I'm going, what's happening? What is happening here? Did I just get scammed? Did I just get sold a bill of lies? And I'm looking up all this stuff and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's there. Like, there it is. It's all documented. And that's kind of was a bit of a wake up call for me. Same thing with Pat Buchanan. The way he downplays certain things, the way he leaves out certain information in his book and things like that. Now, with that being said, I do embrace a lot of the things that Pat Buchanan says. Do I think World War II was a horrible mistake? Absolutely. But I think the problem is not so much with World War II as it is World War One and the end of World War One. My opinion is that World War One was the true unnecessary war. If we had stopped World War One, there would never been a World War Two. There would never been a Hitler. There never been, Mussolini. I guess Mussolini, he was a bit of a goofy guy, so but there would have been no Stalin. There would have been none of that. The fall of the monarchs in 1918 was truly the downfall, the beginning of the downfall of Western civilization. I wish the monarchs had never fallen. I wish those empires, the German Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Russian Empire, I would rather have those here than what we have today. What we had for the next several decades after World War II. That's what I wish. I would rather have that. I'd rather deal with the imperial powers than the horrors of the Nazis and the Soviets. And again, Mussolini is just kind of out there. But truly, that was the beginning of the end for Western civilization. And we brought it on ourselves. Britain gets involved in 2 world wars, and its great grand empire pretty much collapses by the end of it. And that's, the rest is history, as it were. So I do hold to a lot of that stuff. I absolutely believe that. I do hold to a lot of what the post-war consensus argues for. The fall of and the collapse of the Western society was due to the consensus after World War II that we must be rid of nationalistic ideas, we must become more of an international society, postmodernism, stuff like that. That is absolutely stuff that we should oppose, especially as Christians. I'm all for that kind of stuff. I'm into that. My problem is with the individuals who don't know how to find proper balance and differentiate these things. Again, what they do is they go into like, hey, I just learned some interesting things about World War II, and they just kind of take that and they just start to tumble downhill to the point where Hitler wasn't such a bad guy, and like how do you put on the brakes for something like that? You have to learn how to do those kinds of things, to think critically, think carefully about these things. Take time with new things that you've learned to reflect on these things before you just jump on. If it's this, then it must be this. Well, then it must be that. Then it must be that. Then it must be, just like, hey, let's put the brakes on here. Okay, hold up, hold your horses. Okay, are you really trying to say that Hitler wasn't such a bad guy? I'm not sure I'd go that far. That's a little disturbing to me, to be honest with you. I'm not really ready to accept that. But I have had people say to me, like to my face, say that, Hitler, I think Hitler was a Christian actually, and, he was opposing all kinds of liberal ideologies that we're fighting today, Jewry or whatever, all that kind of, like, that's what he was all really actually about. He wasn't anti-Semitic, he wasn't this, that, the other thing, blah, 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 blah. So, I'm going to read you some quotes here that well, not quotes, but some stuff I found. And I used AI to help me find this stuff, but if you put in the right prompts, if you have AI, hey, look, I want to know, honest to God, like, just give me the straight facts. AI will deliver those things to you. Here I have some citations from Mein Kampf, Hitler's manifesto, his very infamous manifesto. In Mein Kampf, Volume 1, Chapter 2, Hitler describes Jews as, quote, the great masters of the lie, and frames anti-Semitism as a rational conclusion he reached through observation. The chapter is essentially a blueprint of his racial hatred. From Mein Kampf, Volume 1, Chapter 11, he explicitly frames Jews as a racial rather than religious group, and argues they are incapable of building civilization, only destroying. Here's what's called a prophecy speech. January 30th, 1939, Hitler stated that if war came, it would lead to the annihilation of the Jewish race in Europe. Die Vernichtung der jüdischen Rasse in Europa. I'm trying to get better at my German, so... But the German word, Vernichtung, I think that's how you pronounce it, means destruction or annihilation. There is no softer interpretation. So the destruction and the annihilation of the Jews. And then there are actual interviews, apparently, of Hitler before he even came to power, where he's talking about this stuff. His desire to wipe out the Jews, to take them out, just to completely wipe them out. So that's just a few things. As early as Mein Kampf. His ideology. Now, Hitler had this perspective. I asked the AI here, I said, to be fair to Hitler, isn't it true that a lot of wealthy bankers, such as the Rothschilds, were active? Okay, hold on, before I go to that, I asked this question. Would it be accurate that Hitler believed Jews ran the banks and therefore forced Germany and Austria to capitulate to the Allies? And this AI, Claude, says, yes, that is an accurate characterization of Hitler's stated beliefs, and it is well documented the conspiracy theory was central to his view. Again, this is stuff that's being peddled today. The Jews are running everything. They run the banks. They do all this stuff. It's the Jews, it's the Jews, it's the Jews. And again, I was kind of falling into some of this stuff because I was starting to find some interesting connections. Again, I was reading up on the Rothschilds. I saw a book, by the way, at the local Barnes and Nobles. I really wanted to get it on the Rothschilds, just to learn more about it, But I was kind of jumping into this conspiracy theory stuff. Like, the only reason I was doing much of this research was in order to confirm the conspiracy theory, and that's dangerous. See, that's dangerous. If you're doing your history research or your research to confirm the conspiracy theory, you're going to find it. It's not going to be hard to confirm it. When you are just a hammer looking for a nail, you're going to find your nail. You're going to find it. But if you're just doing history for the sake of history, just being honest, something starts to happen. And what happened with me was suddenly I just kind of realized, okay, we can agree. And so I said to this AI here, I said, to be fair to Hitler, isn't it true that a lot of wealthy bankers, such as the Rothschilds, were active in this period? But that doesn't prove they had sinister intentions to rule the world through banking. And again, it says you're absolutely correct on both counts. And this is actually a really important historical distinction to understand. So it's true that the Rothschilds, yes, they were big bankers. It's true that during the Napoleonic Wars, they funded both sides. And you can talk about the morality of that all you want. Sure, I'm not going to argue with that at all. But does that mean that the Jews were calculating the control of the world? You have to start asking the question, okay, so the Rothschilds, very wealthy bankers, financiers, and stuff like that, therefore sinister, dominating the world? Does that automatically mean that? Not really. And actually, this AI gives an interesting explanation for this. It says the Rothschild family and other Jewish banking families were indeed prominent in European finance in the 19th and early 20th century. This is a simple historical fact. Jewish people had been pushed into finance and money lending in medieval Europe partly because Christians were forbidden by the church from charging interest. So Jews filled that economic niche. Over generations, some families became very successful. So basically, what this is saying is, yeah, these Jewish people, got really wealthy and they got really good at finance, but it's partly because the Christians wouldn't do it. And it's basically why. Someone was going to do it, and they just were like, hey, I see an opportunity right here. It's the same. It is the classic case of, I see a chance to make a buck here, and I'm going to go for it. And that was it. Is there anything behind that? So when you look at something like that, is there any way to conclude from that, yes, we're going to take over the world? I mean, no, that's not, no. You can't, those classic fallacies of, like post hoc fallacy kind of stuff like that. The conclusion doesn't quite follow. When you have better, more probable explanations, just simpler explanations, go with those. Just go with those. Occam's razor, guys. It's just so much easier. Life's just much easier when you use Occam's razor. But when it comes to conspiracy theories, I'm looking at what's going on right now. It's one thing to recognize how we've been lied to, legacy media, the deep state, everything like that. It's cool to recognize that kind of stuff and that is real. I absolutely affirm that stuff. But the mistake a lot of people are making today is because they've recognized I've been lied to, they're trying to pull themselves out of the matrix, as it were. And in many ways, that actually only makes you more gullible to false information. And I was kind of getting into it with some people on a Tim Pool post on YouTube, and one guy had commented, and it's like the top comment in the whole comment section. He says, social media is destroying our ability to think. And some people were arguing over this, and the thing. And I was kind of getting into it with some people about how I'm convinced that there's a direct connection to the mass depression and anxiety we're dealing with as a society and the chronic online syndrome we're dealing with. There's a direct connection. People saying things in the group, in the chat, or in the comment section, they're saying things like, well, it's problematic, but the internet is good because it's allowed people to uncover so many problems with our society. And I replied to that comment and said, you mean that's true? That is very true, absolutely. But the problem is we're being so saturated with the verbosity of information right now that we're not stopping to ask, how should I think about this? How do I think about any of this stuff? No one's doing that. We're just snapping, just grabbing information, just boom, 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 and going. I mean, I'm making this video days after the assassination attempt on President Donald Trump. because I wanted to understand more of what was going on before I said anything about it. But people are just mouthing and just going, there is no more real attempts to reflect and to think. In fact, I'm curious right now. I want to use some AI to help me here again. Let's check this out here real quick. Turn my little keyboard back on. Can you give, me biblical citations about the importance of patience and reflection before we react or respond to something? Let's see what we get. So here's some relevant biblical citations that emphasize the importance of patience, slowing down, reflection, and self-control before reflecting or reacting or responding impulsively. These verses highlight wisdom in restraint, thoughtful speech, and waiting on God rather than rushing into words or actions. Key themes and verses. Patience and slow to anger. James chapter 1, verse 19 through 20. My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. So then you have Proverbs 14, verse 29. Whoever is patient has great understanding, but one who is quick-tempered displays folly. Proverbs 15:18. A hot-tempered person stirs up conflict, but the one who is patient calms a quarrel. Proverbs 16:32. Better a patient person than a warrior, one with self-control, than one who takes a city. Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verses 8 through 9. The end of a matter is better than its beginning, and patience is better than pride. Do not be quickly provoked in your spirit, for anger resides in the lap of fools. Reflection and thoughtful speech. Proverbs 15:28. The heart of the righteous weighs its answers, but the mouth of the wicked gushes evil. Proverbs 18, verse 13. To answer before listening, that is folly and shame. Proverbs 21:23. Those who guard their mouths and their tongues keep themselves from calamity. Proverbs 29:11. Fools give full vent to their rage, but the wise bring calm in the end. So there's a bunch more here that it gave me. But I think you get the picture, right? We have forgotten this. We don't do this anymore. We are just going. No thinking. We hear something on the internet and we're just like, oh my God, and we just rush in and I gotta say something about this. And that's not good, guys. That's not good for us. Again, this is why I'm just absolutely, I'm certain right now we have an epidemic. We have a couple of them. The epidemic for the right, as it were, the Christians and the woke right, is we are responding faster than we take the time to think things through. To just, all right, I just heard this crazy thing. You know what I'm gonna do? Let's just hold on. Let's just pray about this, think about it, before we respond. Let's do that. Let's be grown-ups. Let's be adults. We're not doing any of that stuff. We're just not. We're so wound up because we're chronically online, and that's just not good for us mentally. I know there's some people who may watch this, who knows, but you don't want to hear this. But I have to tell you, and I do this because I love you and I care about you. I care about your mental health. You need to get off the internet. You just need to get off of social media for a while, and find real people. Hang out with those real people in your church, whatever. I go downtown and I do evangelism with a group of guys. I go to church and I talk to people. I have great conversations with them. I also, on the weekends, I'm starting to do this thing where I meet up with a buddy of mine. I go to his house, we have cigars, and we just talk, man. We talk about godly things together. We just sit there and we talk with each other until the sun goes down. And then we have dinner, we play games with some other friends, and then Sunday, the church stuff, and Sunday evenings, I have a cigar with my dad. So I kind of have 2 cigars over the weekend. And I really enjoy that. Like, that's just, and then last Friday, I met with a dear brother of mine for a little discipleship and stuff, and over dinner. And I always love his advice and his wisdom. Absolutely love it. That's like, you need that stuff. You need that in your life. Say, I don't have any of that stuff. Well, that's a problem, and you need to figure that out. You need to fix that. I don't know how you fix that. That's not. Sometimes, guys, you are your own worst enemy. Sometimes the reason why you don't have friends is because of you. I know those are, again, hard words, but that's just kind of the way it is. I'm just telling you the truth. I know, as somebody who's been there, I know what it's like. And by the way, I've seen people who've said on Facebook about, like, if you tell somebody that you know what they're going through, it just signals to them that you're just talking down to them. I'm like I read that and I was like, no, that's not why I'm saying that. Like, where are you getting this idea? I mean, see, again, this is the chronic online anxiety stuff. You throw the walls up, you get defensive and stuff like that. No, the reason why I say something like that to you is because I actually understand. I literally, like, there's no obfuscate, there's nothing hidden behind that. If you interpret it that way, that's your fault. That's on you. It's not on me. I'm just being totally honest with you. I know exactly what you're talking about, what you're thinking about, how it's, how the depression you're going through, the loneliness. I know what that's like. And I'm just going to tell you straight up, you are your own problem. You are the problem. It's not that guy, it's not them. It's you. And you need to just basically swallow the pride, stop being selfish, find people who will encourage you, will help build you up. They're always around. You can't tell me that there's nobody. I mean, that's just unless you're living in a town full of like 20 people. If you're living in a big city, they are there. You're just not looking for them because you're isolating. And then as you're isolating, you're getting on social media more, and that's just only heightening your own loneliness and depression, and it's a vicious cycle. And you need to get out of that. Like, I want to take you by the shoulders and be like, you gotta get out of this. Stop that. Turn it off. I know some people don't want to hear that. I know you don't want to hear that. Typically, when our idols get hit, we get pretty offended by it. But that's just the way it is. That's how it is. Speaking of how it is, brings me to this next thing I wanted to talk about. Another thing that is bothering me, and I feel like I really want to express here as clearly as I possibly can, my position on Donald Trump, the state of our politics today. So I want to be very clear about this, because I got into a big old spat with some guy on social media. He's on my friends list. When I say in a spat, I mean, it's actually kind of on him. I was trying to have a conversation with him, and he snapped at me one day, and when he did that, I tried to see if I can maybe rebound the whole thing, or pick up the pieces and try to, de-escalate, you might say. But he never responded to me. So after that, I was just like, well, you know what? There's really no point in talking to you anymore, because if you're going to respond in that way, there's just nothing really we need to do at this point. So I don't want to escalate things. I just stopped commenting on his videos, or not his videos, but his posts. But he's doing all this stuff, like, being super principled as a Christian. You can't support any of the politics and the politicians because they're just not Christian. They're not Christian enough, and he got to the point where he's basically saying even people like James White and Jeff Durbin, we can't really truly support them. And I'm like sitting there like, so what are you asking for? You're asking for the perfect candidate? And that's when he snapped at me. I didn't ask that, but I just said, there is no such thing as a perfect candidate. You're just never going to have that. And that's when he snapped at me. But Uh, but it's true. I mean, like I look at posts like that, and I just like, what are you asking for? What do you? Because to me, when you're critiquing something, you're not just doing a negative critique. You have to be presenting something positive. So when you're saying this isn't going to work, I want to ask you, okay, well then what is going to work? What's the solution? What do we do? And if you can't answer that question in any way, shape, or form, if your answer to that is just, well, we just gotta, there's just, it is what, there's just nothing we can do. So it's just, then my next follow up is like, okay, well then why are you talking about these things if you don't have any solution to them? So you're just gonna sit on social media all day and you're just gonna complain about things that you readily admit you can't change. There's nothing we can do about it. What's the point in talking about it then? You know, what are we doing here? I don't get it. Um, I'm looking for solutions. I want solutions to these things. Okay. Um, so, but this whole issue with the being I genuinely I told a friend of mine over Messenger about this. I said, I think for a lot of these people who talk like this about, I can't take the lesser two evils or whatever. I refuse to compromise my principles and blah, blah, blah. I honestly think a lot of these people, and I wonder about this. I wonder if right now, as a collective society, people want more than anything. They want virtue. They want moral uprightness, which is a good thing to have. But you gotta kind of be careful at the same time to not romanticize that whole concept. And that's what I think is happening. When I say romanticize, I'm talking about taking it to a level that is just simply not realistic. I told this friend over Messenger, I said, I would really like to have a very meek, godly president. Absolutely. But I also just think that we kind of need a guy who's a little ruthless in that position. We just kind of do. If our local pastor were to become president, I feel like the United States really wouldn't do very well, because that position needs to be in the hands of somebody who is a good, honest, faithful Christian, but is also a little ruthless. That the position just simply calls for that kind of attitude. And so, it's hard to navigate, and I'm trying to think about it and be fair about it, but it's difficult. Going back to the lesser two evils thing, the idea that you can just, I refuse to vote for the lesser two evils. I'm not. I won't do that. I listen to stuff like that, and I'm just like, okay, well, if you don't want to be part of any solutions, then go away. Stop saying things. I don't understand why you talk when you're just basically saying there's nothing to do, there's nothing that can be done, and never will be. Oh yeah, there can be something done. Well, not if you're taking the position you're taking, because you're making it sound like I want the solution that I want is a solution that has no faults, no flaws to it, because I refuse to take the lesser of two evils, right? Because I'm so principled, I'm so moral. Because again, we're a society that wants all the moral stuff, and now we're looking for like moral perfection. It seems like. The simple fact is, guys, the reality of things is simply this. That whole idea of I will not choose the lesser of two evils, blah, 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 too principled, all that stuff, it just doesn't deal with reality. It's just the way it is. It doesn't face reality. I would like to be in a situation where I could pick an option that was absolutely like, yes, this is the ideal candidate. This is what I've always wanted. But you're never gonna have that. You're just never gonna have that. You wanna know why? Because you're dealing with sinners, and you always will be. Always. Just Always. If we took this idea of I'm too principled, I will never compromise, you would never get married. Because even in marriage, you're always compromising on some level whatsoever, on some level. You are always dealing with evil. It's just the way it is. That's why I say this stuff is unrealistic. It just simply doesn't deal with reality. People like this don't deal with reality. And then, of course, when it comes to reality, people who seem to have this idea that, you know, the United States is under judgment. We're all, you know, doomed and whatever. And it's like they're basically saying we should just let that happen. We should just let the judgment happen and let the United States pay for its sins and collapse or something like that. Like, well, I kind of want to ask you guys, what are you asking for? Like, are you saying the United States should just completely collapse? Is that what you're asking for? And if that is what you're asking for, and I actually had one guy say that to me in a comment section one time. So, yep. Yeah, we're a nation that murders babies, which is true, by the way. But, and therefore, you know, the system should just completely collapse. I just like, okay, but you realize what you're asking for when you say something like that. You realize what you're asking for, right? Do you have any idea what's going to happen if the United States government, like, legitimately collapses? You understand what will happen to the power grid, because there's no functioning government, there's no funding, none of that stuff. I mean, I ran through some scenarios with Grok one time. I should really go through my fascinating conversations with Grok. I asked Grok, basically, I want a realistic scenario based on the situations that we're dealing with today. Let's say the United States government collapses in the next year or so, completely collapses. We default on our debt, whatever. What's the most likely, most realistic scenario? And I said to Grok, it's like, I realize this is all theoretical, so it's kind of hard to gauge, but that's why I'm asking you, because someone like me is an idiot and wouldn't really be able to truly, but you're an AI and you can kind of calculate this stuff and give me something. That's why I was asking him. Gave me a long list of stuff that's going to happen. Let me sum it all up for you, okay? People are going to die. A lot of people are going to die. A lot of people. It would be like the plague all over again, but except it won't be an actual sickness, although disease would be part of it, would become part of it, because people are going to starve. Starvation leads to disease and death. But people are going to die. It's going to be in the thousands, perhaps the millions of people dying from various different things. Again, starvation, disease, wars, civil wars, kind of stuff like that, looting, anarchy. Every day will be a fight for survival for who knows how long, decades. I mean, eventually Grok said what's going to happen. Power blocks are going to form. Probably the United States would break into, Grok said, basically 4 power blocks, you know, kind of north, south, west, and east kind of thing. You know, the east, like the New York areas, the north, you know, South Dakota, North Dakota, those areas. The south with Texas, the west, California, would form new sort of power block country states, basically. It would be a fascinating story to tell, by the way. It'd be like a novel, fiction, alternate history story. It'd be interesting. But, you know, you'd eventually get something like that. But before you get there, people are going to die. A lot of people. And most likely, that would be someone in your family. At least one person, probably more. And I ask you, is that what you want? You want that to happen? You know, come on, what else do you think would happen? I mean, do you people ever think this kind of stuff through? Do you really think any of this stuff through? It's like, some of you guys, maybe you need to like play a little chess, you know, learn how to think ahead, you know, anticipate moves ahead of time and plan accordingly. Because most of you people sit on the internet all day and you're pontificating, you're talking all this stuff and blah, 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 blah. And again, a lot of it's just romantic. But none of you are, I guarantee you, the vast majority of you guys, if not all of you, or these people, are not actually thinking about the reality that would happen if the things that they say should happen were to actually come true. Because they're living in fantasy land. It's just fantasy stuff. It's just sitting on the internet all day. And I mean, when you're on social media all day, you can fantasize about so much, and puff yourself up to in so many ways. That's why a lot of people who are constant on social media, especially Christians, in day-to-day life, just you wouldn't recognize if they're a Christian or not, because they're not as bold in person as they are in actual social media, on social media. That's why they don't go out on the streets to be as bold on social media as they would be in the streets, because that's a whole different ball game. That's where the rubber really meets the road. That's the reality of things. It's just easier to be on Facebook and social media and do these things. It's just easier. And it is. Like, I know that, because it's much easier for me, naturally, to be bold on social media than it is out in the streets and stuff here where I live. But I'm pretty sure that's a lot of people who talk about this stuff. They don't really understand what they're actually asking for, what they're saying should happen to their own families. Now, look, to be clear, do I think America is under judgment? Absolutely. Yes, I do. I do think we're under judgment. I do think we're headed towards some kind of possible catastrophic situation. But should I extrapolate from the idea that we're under judgment? Should I take from that therefore I should wish for that to happen? I don't think the Bible calls me to do that. I want to try and prevent that from happening. I don't have kids. I would like to one day. And hopefully I can one day. But I do have nieces, I have a nephew, and I know other kids, at church and stuff. I want them to grow up in a good society. I want them to be well and safe. That's what I want for them. For me to then desire that the society that would allow them to be safe and to just collapse and give them a life of misery and heartache, I find that to be immoral. That to me is immoral. And people calling for something like that, I find you to be very immoral. So what is my position? My position is simply, I choose, first of all, again, when we recognize that the whole refusing to choose the lesser of two evils is silly and stupid and unrealistic, when we recognize that, we move on to the second point. Okay, well, we have to choose something. So let's pick the side that is certainly the lesser evil and doesn't hate us. Trump is not the best president, of course. He has many of his own faults. He has many flaws. But I keep saying, yeah, but you know what? At least he doesn't hate me. And at least under his administration, we have an opportunity right now to truly spread the gospel. All this stuff that all these people on social media say we should be doing, the gospel. Well, how are you doing that other than just doing it on social media, which is where intellect goes to die? How are you doing any of that stuff? Take advantage. So I say, why not, instead of just sitting on social media all day and whining and complaining about things not being the way you want, why don't you go and try to make a difference? Where you can actually make a difference. Sorry. Why not try to do that? What's stopping you? Again, I would just say I think you're the one who's stopping you. Because you're not as bold. I'm talking to the people who may watch this who are what I'm describing. Because they're not as bold as they say they are. Because you see, the simple fact, It's easier to get on social media and complain about things that suck than it is to actually try and make a difference. It's just easier. And that's what we want. We want lives of convenience and ease. We want to talk the tough game, but not actually do anything about it. That's what we want. And that's the unfortunate state of our society. And the bold Christians on social media who are talking about the crimes of Israel and the crimes of America and it's under judgment and blah. I mock them because I don't have any respect for people like that. I don't. But that's kind of, so conspiracy theories. Conspiracy theories are dumb. They're stupid. I constantly ask these people who peddle these conspiracies, like Eric, like all the stuff that happened over the weekend. I constantly where's your evidence? Do you have any evidence for this? Crickets, always. The kryptonite of conspiracy theories is evidence. I mean, and it has to, because that's the very definition of a conspiracy theory. It's predicated on the idea that it's a theory. It's a conspiracy theory. If it's a theory, that means it doesn't actually have the smoking gun that would take it beyond a conspiracy or a theory. So it's just there's no actual evidence for it. So it's just all you have to do is ask these people. It's what's your evidence for that? Well, there's this over here. Okay, well that's certainly correlative in some sense. That could support your conspiracy theory if you had a smoking gun, but that's not a smoking gun. That could be explained in other ways. There's other explanations for that. Excuse me. Have you ever thought about that? Have you ever thought that there may be another explanation, a better one, a simpler one, before you jumped into all this weird stuff? Look, guys, conspiracy theories, they don't make you smart. I'm losing my voice here. Sorry. They don't make you smart. In fact, honestly, I think the more we are indulging in conspiracy theories, the more we are revealing how gullible and kind of dumb we are. And we are proving the legacy media, they're warning to us. We're kind of proving them right when they basically said, look, if you allow new media to take over, people who should not be having a voice are going to end up having a voice. And that's kind of happened, because there are people, Ian Carroll, people like that, who I used to listen to, by the way. People like him should not have a voice because he's an idiot. He doesn't actually do legitimate research. He's good at making it look like he does. But like I just showed you right now, and like the historical podcasts I like to listen to a lot, they do actual scholarly research. They actually read books. They read original citations, not the weird conspiracy theory stuff online that's reinterprets information, leaves out certain context information and stuff like that to create their conspiracy theories. They leave all that stuff out. And it's, again, the best lies, the thing that makes them so convincing is they have little pebbles of truth to them. Again, like Hitler. Is Hitler wrong that there were powerful, wealthy Jewish financiers in Germany and in Europe and stuff? No, he wasn't wrong. He was actually correct. But then he extrapolates from that the idea that, therefore, they're all evil. And they're trying to destroy Germany. They're trying to destroy the Aryan race and all this stuff. And therefore, we got to do something about that. He takes a little kernel of truth and then twists it. My throat is completely drying out here. I should have had something more than my coffee because I'm out of coffee. And so that's probably a good sign I should end this. Because I have a sore throat right now. I think it's allergies, and it's just I'm getting a tickle in my throat, and I'm getting no moisture in my throat right now. So I'm very sorry. I'll end this here with just simply saying we need to get off the internet for a while. Do what I just showed you here with the Proverbs passages, the biblical passages. Take time to think and reflect. Get your bearings back. And when you're going to do research, you need to do legitimate research. You need to actually go to original citations. You need to confirm sources. Okay? I know it's fun to be conspiracy theorists. Like Joe Rogan has said, conspiracy theories, they're kind of fun. I know they're fun, but they're also kind of stupid. And if you want to actually be taken seriously, you have to deal with real, legitimate information. You have to cross-reference information. Don't just go, hey, I saw that on the internet, it must be true. Wait a while, because I've seen so many things the last several weeks about conspiracy theories, like, oh, look at that. And then, I would wait a couple of days and suddenly, find an explanation for that. Like, it turns out there's actually a good explanation for that. There's some things, obviously, like those Israeli soldiers beating up that statue of Christ. That's obviously that's not good. And by the way, guys, I'm not a peddler of Israel. I'm not getting my 7K. I don't believe that Israel are the Jews are God's chosen people just because they're Jews. I think God's chosen people are Christians, and that is Jew and Gentile. Anybody who professes Christ, whether they're Jew or Gentile, those are God's chosen people, not Jesus rebukes that idea in several passages in John. The idea, like in John chapter 8, when Jesus straight up tells these Jews, when they invoke Abraham, well, we have Abraham. Basically saying, we come from the line of Abraham, says the promises were given to Abraham, and we come from Abraham, therefore they're to us. Like, basically, we are of the Jewish race, therefore we get the promises. And Jesus is like, nope, that ain't how it works. So I don't sit here and think that I'm just some shill for Israel. You're not going to see me with a Star of David anywhere in my, I'm not into any of that stuff. But I'm also not stupid and insane and just gullible. I'm not just going to buy conspiracy theories that can't be proven. This is a war for Israel, the Iranian war. What's the proof? What's the proof? There's no actual proof. And the so-called proof that you provide has explanations that are better. They all of them do. And contrary to what some people have tried to argue with me that this is, I've said from the beginning, this is a war for oil, this is a war for energy resource, and it's also targeting China. I still believe that firmly. The actions that China's made recently, the meeting that's coming up with China and Trump, it's the classic case for me of, I can lead you guys to water, I can't make you drink it. I can show you guys the stuff, I can't make you believe it. And stop believing stupid conspiracy theories that can't be proven true. But it's up to you to decide to swallow that pill. So, I don't know, I guess that's just sort of all I wanted to say. This didn't go exactly how I wanted it to go. It's a little bit messy, but something's wrong with our society right now. We are chronically online, and being chronically online is increasing anxiety levels, depression levels, and I think that's having an effect on our ability to think critically and rationally and carefully, taking time to reflect on things. It's having a serious effect on that. That's not good. Something needs to be done about this. Should the government do something about it? I don't think that's the right way to go. We have to take this upon ourselves, be grown-ups, and do this ourselves. But being a grown-up is recognizing the problem. Going, I'm on the internet too much, man. I gotta do something about this. Yeah, that's on you and me. We have to be willing to face that. And I hope and pray that that's what we're going to do, because something needs to be done. Something is seriously wrong with us. We are sick, mentally, spiritually. For me, there's no other explanation for why people are buying these wacky, kooky conspiracy theories. There's just nothing else that explains it. It's just, it can only be people who think that they're thinking critically, but aren't. And those are dangerous kind of people. And I guess I'll just say this really quickly. When it comes to history, right before the French Revolution blew up into mass violence and hysteria, which led to the murders of thousands of people, innocent people, in Robespierre's reign of terror. But you know what's kind of like how it started? Because revolutions, they don't happen in a vacuum. Things have to happen to make them happen. In the French society, particularly in Paris, the concept of news pamphlets were becoming widespread. Literacy, people could read now, and they're reading so much, like they're being saturated with news now. It's sort of like that time period's version of new media. And just like what's happening today, in that time period, people were getting flooded with so much information, and some of that information was involving the writings of Voltaire, Rousseau, Enlightenment thinkers who were being banned from the monarchs because they were challenging the legitimacy of the ancien regime, the old order, the ancient order that many of the Enlightenment thinkers called it. People started reading this stuff, and it began to change the way they were thinking about their place in society. To start thinking about the kings as they're actually just people like us. They're not divine people. They're not demigods. They're actually just human beings. They bleed just like us. And that's, of course, dangerous to the monarchs and stuff. So, and that starts to fester. It starts to fester and fester to the point that certain events would happen. You know, France is in major debt crisis. The revolutionaries would use these events to push revolution. Say, look, see, they're all corrupt. And there's truth to that. But see, they again, like I told you, they take a little bit of a truth and they just run away with it. And the masses, you know, I like what they said, what's his name? In Men in Black. Was it Tommy Lee Jones? Yeah, Tommy Lee Jones, his character says, after Will Smith's character, you know, he's being recruited into the Men in Black, and Will Smith's character just goes, you know, why don't we tell people about this stuff? I mean, people are smart, they can figure it out. Tommy Lee Jones' character says, the person is smart, but people are dumb, crazy, and hysterical, panicky. That was like a really cool line. Sort of paradoxical in a sense. But he was right. And if you look into the readings and the writings of Voltaire kind of said a similar thing. Voltaire, even though he was an Enlightenment thinker, he was kind of a nuanced one. He understood. He did not deny the fact that the masses were extremely susceptible and gullible to propaganda and extremism. And the thing about the masses is, if you understand how the psychology of, I'll put it to you this way. I'll be downtown a couple of times, sometimes I'll be downtown, and it'd be a group of people, big old group of people. They're just kind of all gathered, and they're coming along, and I got a tract in my hand. And I'll hand it to one person in that group, usually the first person. If he takes the tract, you know what usually happens? Everybody follows suit and they want one. If he doesn't take it, they all say no. Almost every time. Because it's a group think. It's infectious. That one decision by one person in the group affects everybody else in the group. We are naturally a people who want to go with the crowd. And sometimes that crowd is dangerous, the mob. And so anyways, that starts to infect the minds, all those ideas begin to sort of fester in the minds of the people, and it just grows to the point that when the revolution starts, basically, as it starts to progress, people become more and more radicalized as the monarch pushes back. They begin to, and there's all kinds of rumors about Louis the 16th and Marie Antoinette, false rumors. Most of them are absolutely false, but they're spread and they make them look bad. And it just adds more fuel to the fire of the revolutionaries. And again, so much of these claims are speculative, they're gossip, and none of them were true. They were all false, but people believed them. They believed them anyway. It's kind of like certain people today with certain podcasts who are spreading all kinds of false information about a poor young widow. And seeing her, the video of her crying is just heartbreaking, which makes me more disgusted at people like Candace Owens and people who listen to Candace Owens, who I have no respect for. She's a disgusting human being, a truly disgusting human being, a horrible human being. But again, how does this happen? People are getting flooded with information, and they're also being propagated that their leaders, their authorities have been lying to them. No brakes are being put on that kind of propaganda, so they just take it and run crazy with it to the point where they're just like, it's all bad, it's all corrupt, it's all gotta come down, and all this stuff. And then, of course, in France, a complete breakdown of society. Radicals take over. Thousands of people end up dying. Again, at the hands of the radicals who've taken over the government. And all this happened because it started with people flooded with so much information to the point that they basically become so convinced, and they don't know how to think about things. They start becoming paranoid. I mean, everything is a conspiracy now. They're seeing conspiracy plots everywhere, and they're killing each other as a result. I mean, all throughout the French Revolution, just fights for power. And the very leaders of the revolution, their own lives were at stake. One wrong step, they could end up getting guillotined. Their head just chopped right off. They could end up getting accused of being part of a conspiracy theory, and no real trial. They're just accused. They're arrested. And the next day, they're gone. Mass paranoia, leading to mass conspiracy theories, and then violence, death, societal collapse, because of a people who, in their acquisition of new knowledge, new information, new media, thought that they were now smart and they knew things. They understood things. But in reality, they didn't know. They had fooled themselves. They had become puffed up in their knowledge, puffed up in theories that if we just did this, everything would be okay. And didn't turn out well. Didn't turn out well. Thousands of people dead. The king and the queen, who were honestly, actually sympathetic towards the revolution. They were. They wanted to try and find a balanced way, sort of like a constitutional monarchy. They wanted to they were hoping for something like that. But the revolution had gotten so radicalized, they just wouldn't listen. And eventually, both Louis and Marie Antoinette ended up guillotined. It's tragic, it's sad. I felt really bad for them when I heard about that. I mean, especially Marie Antoinette. She had her faults, like, and everybody does, and we've all got our faults. But there's stories about her when she was going to the guillotine. You know, she was frightened, and there's one story that she actually stepped on the executioner's foot by accident and apologized profusely to him. You know, and again, she's like barefoot, like, and he's wearing a boot. This little girl, this little woman, steps on his foot. I mean, he's barely gonna feel that, and she still was like, I'm really, really sorry, you know? It's sad. It's tragic. Could have been avoided. It didn't have to happen that way. This is what happens when people become radicalized. This is the kind of stuff that happens. All sympathy, it goes out the window because they're convinced of an idea that's just not true. It's completely false. It's just utterly false. But they're absolutely convinced of it. And this is what happened. And my fear is, are we on a similar trajectory as that with new media? Am I saying that we should ban new media? No, absolutely not. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is simply this. We get new technology, we get new innovations, and we just run crazy with them. And we don't think about the repercussions of these. And we don't go, hey guys, hold on. You know, this is new stuff. We don't really know how it works. We don't understand all the intricacies and the consequences. Maybe we should take some time to actually think about it a little bit. Nope, we don't do that. We just go nuts with it. And we learn the hard way, guys. And I think sometimes we just don't ever learn. What ends up happening is new media comes in, we go nuts with it, it gets out of control, and then, because it gets out of control, the government comes in to rein it in, get it under control, it becomes the status quo, and then a new innovation comes in and uproots it, and we run crazy with that. People get hurt, instability ensues, and the cycle rinses and repeats. That's pretty much it. And we just refuse to learn the lessons. We just won't learn. We just won't learn. And I'm afraid that this is going to be another situation in which we just aren't going to learn. We are running amok with new media. We're not sitting around. We're not sitting and thinking about, hey guys, what's the repercussions of this kind of stuff? What do we need to be careful for? No, we're just going nuts with it. We got people who honestly, they profit off of these conspiracy theories. You know, the video of Erica Kirk right before the shooting, scratching her chin. There's a video of someone saying that this is some kind of cue. And that video got like thousands, if not millions of views. Whoever made that video, dude, they're raking it in. And I bet you that person who made that video, they don't actually believe in it stuff, but they're just going, look at all these suckers. They just clicked on my video and I'm getting tons of views. That's the society we're living in right now. That's what this new media stuff is allowing people to do. They're getting clicks, they're getting money, quick and easy. That's what it's about for them. And people like all the conspiracy theory peddlers, they're feeding that stuff. They're feeding it. That's dangerous. It's gonna get people killed. It's gonna get people hurt. It's not good, guys. This stuff is bad. We have to be careful. We have to step back and start thinking. Use our brains. The Proverbs and the passages I was just showing you. Something needs to be done. But I am repeating myself at this point, so I need to go get something to drink because my throat is really dry. Something in the air. It's just, I've had this sore throat for the last almost week. I'm not sick. I'm not getting sick or anything like that, but I don't know what it is. But my prayer is that as a country, we will get our heads back together, step back. You want to talk about national repentance? If you want to do national repentance, how about this? Call everybody to turn off social media for a week and contemplate the holiness of God and who we are before Him, who we must be. How about that? Something to think about. God bless. Bye.